Trayvon Martin, an unarmed 17-year-old African-American male, was fatally shot by George Zimmerman, a then 28-year-old male of Hispanic descent in Florida in February of 2012. Now, Neighborhood Watch volunteer Zimmerman's claim of self-defense was supported by a jury when they acquitted him of second-degree murder and manslaughter charges on July 13th of this year. The case has sparked debate over racial profiling, and the verdict has set off protest marches nationwide, including here in Albuquerque. Joining us on the line opinion panel to talk about this and other topics as well, Antoinette Cedillo-Lopez, UNM law professor. Nice to see you here again, as always. A familiar face from the Garrity Group, public relations, Tom Garrity, takes a seat for us. Dr. Harold Bailey, president of the Albuquerque chapter of the NAACP and former executive director of the New Mexico Office of African American Affairs, is here. Doc, great to have you finally back on. After 5 years, I'm embarrassed. And last but not least, the CEO of the New Mexico Greens Chamber of Commerce, Laura Sanchez, our regulars here. Now, Antoinette, I appreciate everyone coming together and talk about this, because it would seem for a lot of America, this conversation is over. But for us here at New Mexico PBS, it's important for us to keep this kind of dialogue going and get underneath some of the rhetoric. And Antoinette, let me start with you. Now that we've had a couple of weeks of reflection, I'm curious to find out, maybe for the entire group, have your feelings changed markedly since your initial reaction to the verdict? If so, how, and what might have been the change?
Well, I was shocked. Sort of like everyone was sort of shocked. But I've come to reflect on it. And now, it was interesting. I'm worried. And the reason I'm worried is because when the community doesn't agree with what the legal system does, sometimes that puts the legal system on trial. Now, not that it shouldn't be on trial, but sometimes people can overreact. And so I'm excited that we're having this debate, because I think we need to continue having the debate. And we need to think about, okay, what are all the things that we need to examine in this case? And I think it's, now as I've reflected, I realize we're such a fearful society. And I think that this case really drew out people's fears. But I'm glad that we're talking about it. So I'm to say, yes, my feelings deepened, they've changed, and I think it is time to be really reflective of the things about the things that went wrong and how to fix them.
Sure, I appreciate you sharing that, but I'm also curious, while I got you here, what's been the tenor of students at UNM? I'm very curious on a generational basis what you might have been gleaning from some of the students at the UNM Law in their reaction to this verdict.
They're split as well.
As well, just like society.
That's what I'm gathering, is split.
Interesting.
And I've been trying to focus them on the legal system. Let's think about what this means for the legal system.
Right, I want to come back to that. It's an interesting point there. Doc Bailey, good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
The difference between justice and a legal outcome. Meaning, Antoinette, we'll come back to this, the system, of course, function in its capacity to come up with a legal outcome, but for a lot of folks that did not conform to what might think is justice. Where do you come down on
legal
that?
Outcome, it was a legal outcome. I disagree with it. I think there's a moral issue. I think it's a race issue. I think the verdict sent a chilling effect, to black Americans that, for young black males and young black men, it's going to be kind of tough. So I think that New Mexico and America, that moral fiber, that moral character that we have is being tested. So I truly, disagree with that verdict.
One of the things that's inherent in some of your approach that you've discussed with us here at New Mexico PBS and others is this is actually, in fact, somewhat of a local issue as well, that a lot of folks don't know in greater New Mexico or Albuquerque. We have similar issues going on as Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. You've been on the forefront of that.
Right, we have another issue, Mr. Jonathan Mitchell, who was killed by, let's just say, a community person. Had a gun carrying permit. We think that this person took a few more steps, just like Mr. Zimmerman. He should not have been there. It was a preventable situation. He should have let law enforcement do their job. And now we have another young African-American war veteran killed. So the NAACP is waiting for a determination from the DA's office.
And that was out in Ventana Ranch, out in the west side of our city, and somewhat similar, as a matter of fact. Laura, good to see you too. Not to put the stones to our lawyers here at the table, but let's talk about verdicts and outcomes and justice. And how did you see this with some reflection, now that you've had a couple of weeks?
Well, I also was shocked. I mean, it definitely was, I think, upsetting to see that outcome. But I didn't follow all the testimony as closely as a lot of people had. The legal analysts seemed to think that there was some issue with enough evidence to make the case on the prosecution side.
Right.
But just from the reaction that I've seen, I had the opportunity to be in D.C. last week actually, so it was very interesting to be there the week after the decision and to listen in on some of the conversations in the subway and on the street corners, and people were still pretty angry. I mean, they were very upset, and there were a lot of comments about, oh, I want to go on vacation, but not Florida. I'm going to boycott Florida, kind of thing.
Right.
I think it does highlight sort of what the issue is with our justice system, as has already been discussed, is that there is that almost disconnect, it feels like, between what you inherently feel is right or ethical, moral, and what the actual legal outcome is within the constraints of our judicial system. So I think that it's one of those times where you feel like something is wrong, and I think it all goes back to the actions that led to Mr. Zimmerman being in that situation.
That's right.
And I think that's what a lot of people are calling for, a re-examination across the country, on the stand your ground laws, but also just on taking personal responsibility for the community,
Right.
and not just seeing everybody who is different from you as a predator of some sort. So I think that's a lot of what is still happening. In reflection, I think I'm not quite as angry perhaps, but I'm certainly still concerned about the issues.
On the legal side of it, there's a lot of concern out there, Laura, that, I heard Al Sharpton say this, that this is now legal precedent for this to happen again. That this would give comfort to those who want to carry arms and be a neighborhood watch, that just that little slight percentage of okay is a very dangerous thing for our country. Would you read it that far into it?
I don't think that, I think that's a stretch. I think it would be hard to see this as precedent. I think people who are not aware of the way the legal system works perhaps would see it as like some sort of a condoning of those kinds of actions, but unless it was the same fact pattern in the same state where this law applies,
Right.
the chances of it coming out exactly the same, I don't necessarily think it's going, that would happen.
Sure.
But for people who are not aware of it and maybe feel more empowered to carry a weapon and take matters into their own hands rather than listen to what a police officer and law enforcement is telling you to do to stay out of a situation, I think maybe for people who are already going to be inclined to take that step, maybe they feel emboldened to do so even more, and that's a danger. I think that's
Sure.
an education issue, and that's something that we have to, as a society, figure out how to deal with some of those attitudes.
That's right. Tom, the president weighed in. He had his own thoughts. He could have been Trayvon Martin in his young age, he spoke about, and then a year and some back. When this happened, he also mentioned Trayvon in a close personal way as well. What does that mean for you when you hear the president weigh in on this? Does it make a difference in how you reflected on this situation? Did it change your point of view at all?
And my interest in the case was really more in the reaction, as opposed to we had the trial on at the office, kind of monitored it, off and on. But the reaction was really kind of what we took a look at. And when we looked at the reaction, when the president weighed in, when the attorney general weighed in, it's kind of like there's nobody else left to weigh in except the Supreme Court justices, because you had two of the three branches of government giving an opinion. So from that perspective, it gives I think Americans comfort to know that this verdict was whether they agree with it or disagree with it, whether they're shocked or not surprised, that it is being addressed at all levels of government. I mean, because we even had elected officials in New Mexico responding to it as well.
That's right.
When we draw it in a little bit closer to New Mexico, really I think comes into more of how do people trust the court system, the court and justice system, because really when you look at another victim of this particular case, is that you look at the victim of the court system. Do people trust it? What is their perception of it? And just some of our own internal surveys, we know that about 31% of New Mexico residents do not have a good favorability of the court and justice system, whereas only 30% do. So neither one is over that 50% mark. Neither one is really so it's a lukewarm kind of deal.
Sure.
And we know that people in Albuquerque and the southwestern part of the state tend to have a higher unfavorability rating with regards to the system. So, I think the opportunity is really in now the court's hands to say, how are we going to say that, everyone has a chance? Here's how the system works. Here's how you can make sure that you're represented fairly.
Doc, let me ask you a question on that point. I know you got a point on that too. One of the things that I've heard that the problematic issue for a lot of folks is Trayvon Martin did not get judged by a jury of his peers and peers in court. None of those women were his peers. They couldn't connect to the situation by nature. Is that fair in your view? Is that a fair way to mete out justice when your peers are not actually considering something?
Well, a lot of times the court system, prosecute the innocent and let the guilty go. So it should have been a black person on there. It could have been a black male on there. But in regards to the court system, the justice system has not always been, friendly to African Americans in America. For an example, here in New Mexico, we represent 2%, 2.5%. In our criminal justice system, we make up over 10%. On a national level, we make up over 45% of the 2.3 million prisoners. So something's wrong with this system. When black people were brought to this country, America was not designed to meet our needs. We were brought here to establish a free labor force. So when you multiply that attitude, that negative attitude directed against a particular group of people, and then you have a criminal justice system, there's going to be a conflict. So we do have to kind of reanalyze our justice system.
Interesting. I want to finish up with you, Antoinette. I want to go back to the question about how juries function, all that kind of thing. Whenever there's a big case, OJ was the same. Well, yeah, we're going to redo the jury system. It doesn't work. It's broken. Whatever the case may be. Your sense of the jury system
there
here?
There were only 6 jurors in this case, and so it was a smaller opportunity for him to get a jury of his peers. And it only takes one juror to raise the questions and you sort of educate the rest of the jurors. So I think that it was a small jury was problematic. I think that that there were no African Americans on it was problematic. I think the process for selecting jurors is problematic because most of the processes tend to exclude significant significant numbers of folks of color. So I think that it is an opportunity to look at our system and see what's wrong with it. How does our system work that perpetuates systemic racism or institutional racism, and how can we get rid of it?
Right. Laura, let's finish up with you. Do you have a thought on that to finish our...
Well, I do, and just, having, obviously I'm an attorney also, and, it's interesting the issue about the peers on the jury, because it's supposed to be a jury made up of peers of the defendant. And I think this highlights, the issue of victims' rights and the fact that when something is, obviously race is an issue and something as tragic as this, it should be taken into consideration in the jury selection as well. But I also wanted to draw a connection between this tragedy that's occurred and this entire case and what happened. There's a new film that's coming out, which unfortunately is not opening here in Albuquerque, but it's called Fruitvale Station, and it's about the killing of a BART police officer, the subway system in San Francisco, a BART officer killing an unarmed African-American young man in Oakland in 2008. And it's a really interesting film. Unfortunately, we're not probably going to get a chance to see it here in Albuquerque, but I think it tells the story and has very similar issues of race.
That should be interesting. I hope that comes to the Guild.
I hope
they're
so
listening
too.
in a month or so. But it makes a very good point. These issues have been in the air. They've been out there for a long time. And what seems to me is this case has brought into focus something that's been in front of us for a long time.
And people don't
We need
want
to
to talk
figure it out.
about
That's
it.
right.
That's the problem.
That's
Race, can't talk about race. And somehow I think we have to make an environment where we're comfortable talking about race and open to the ideas and think about how do we eliminate racism in society.
Well said. Good stuff there. This is a subject worthy of further explanation, and we plan to have an In Focus panel discussion in August on this very subject. Meanwhile, we'll be back in a moment with a front row look at a presidency.